The Lakers have now won 8 out of 10, should be 9 out of 10. They are 4th in offense, 8th in defense, 4th in net rating. LeBron and Russ are both playing really good basketball. Russ is probably in his best 3-game stretch since he came to the Lakers. LeBron's best 2-game stretch of this entire season. The Lakers are good. Like, let's just get right to it. I know it sounds crazy, and if you look at the standings and all the slander that's been thrown their way over the years, it sounds ridiculous to say, but the Lakers are good. All three of their stars will have to maintain this level of play to stay good, and they'll definitely need to make a trade if they want to really compete for a title. But they defend really, really well, especially in the half court. All 3 of their stars are playing really well, so they're scoring the ball really well as anybody in the NBA. They took that Bucks defense in their home arena, the best defense in the NBA, the best half-court defense in the NBA, and they hung a 133 on them. The catalyst for everything is AD. It's been a weird few years for AD, so I wanted to take some time to talk about like how AD has gone from being what he was in 2020 to what he was the last couple of years to what he's become this season. Because I think it's kind of an interesting path, and it kind of is a lesson to a lot of young basketball players on just how important it is to keep your foot on the gas as you're rising through the league. So in 2020, almost immediately when he came in, he was an impact defensive player. Really started holding LeBron James accountable. He finished 2nd in Defensive Player of the Year that year, but he should have been 1st. Kind of similar to the LeBron MVP case. Giannis and the Bucks just had a preposterously easy schedule in the Eastern Conference that year. So all of their metrics were just completely off the charts because like the bottom 7 teams in the East were all tanking, and the Bucks just beat the living shit out of them every single time they played them, which inflated everything. The Lakers were a better defense. They were the best defense in the Western Conference, which was by far the better conference, and AD just simply was a better defensive player that year. He should have been Defensive Player of the Year. LeBron should have been MVP that year. It's actually the only MVP that I think LeBron got robbed of, and Anthony Davis damn sure deserved to get that Defensive Player of the Year award. But it was kind of a weird offensive season. To start the year, they were really force-feeding him in the post. He was taking all of these like weird jump shots, like difficult jump shots, tough turnaround fadeaways, step backs, and things along those lines. Laker fans were all like, what's going on? AD's like trying to be like KD. He's never been KD. That's so strange. What's up with this? And he wasn't making any of them. From the beginning of the season through New Year's Day, he shot just 35% from mid-range and 29% from 3. And then all of a sudden, everything started going in. After New Year's Day, he shot 41% from mid-range and 41% from 3, and then he destroyed everyone in the bubble. These numbers are insane. 50% from mid-range in the playoffs, 38% from 3. He was deadly in ISO and in post-up. He ran 68 ISOs in that playoff run for 75 points, which was in the 93rd percentile, and he ran 130 post-ups for 142 points, which was in the 92nd percentile. So top tier ISO and post player in that postseason run. And then it was arguably the best defensive playoff run from any player ever, culminating with the utter destruction of the Miami Heat in Game 6 of the finals, when they had no idea what to do with him hanging around the rim. I thought he was clearly in the conversation for the best player in the world at that point. I ended up ranking him 4th behind LeBron, Steph, and KD. But then he came into camp in 2021 completely out of shape. And you know what's funny? At the time, no one really thought much of it. The Lakers had a really quick turnaround. If I remember correctly, it was something bizarre, like a month and a half. Like they had like 45 days between, because I think they started just before Christmas, if I remember correctly, and then it was like early October when they won the trophy. So it was like a month and a half. So, you know, Lakers quick turnaround. He had a heavy workload in the finals, or through that whole playoff run. He was dealing with kind of like an ankle thing at that point during the playoffs. So like it was defensible that he would show up to camp out of shape. But it hurt him in a lot of different ways. He looked heavy. He looked like he had lost a significant chunk of mobility. And he completely lost his jump shot. He was back down to 35% from the mid-range for the season, down to 26% from 3. And he kind of just declined into a defensive anchor that wasn't as good as he was the previous year, who could vertically space and do some of the usual AD stuff. But, you know, he wasn't even nearly the same player that he was in 2020. He was also constantly dealing with nagging injuries, including this like weird Achilles tendinosis thing, which is a wear and tear injury, not a, it's not a bad luck type of injury. And that can be associated with your conditioning. He ended up playing a couple of really good playoff games against Phoenix in game 2 and game 3, and then he broke down, pulled his groin, and the Lakers were eliminated. So his big follow-up season to securing a spot in the top tier of the league was a clunky, banged up, out of shape, injury-plagued season where he lost a huge portion of his offensive skill set and finished the season averaging 22-8. Not the same player. And so how did he follow that up? How did he follow up that tough campaign? It was widely reported that he showed up in 2020 in the 2021 training camp out of shape again. And there was no excuse this time. The Lakers had 6 months off, and he couldn't shoot again. He had one of his worst defensive seasons of his entire career. He was plagued with injuries again. Finished the year averaging 23 and 10, 37% from mid-range, 19% from three. Had turned into literally one of the worst jump shooters in the league at volume compared to what he had done in the bubble, which is insane. And the Lakers were terrible. They got outscored with Anthony Davis on the court. The lineups in the previous season when LeBron James and Anthony Davis were off the floor performed better than the LeBron and AD together lineups during last season. The AD of old felt like a distant memory. So how did we go from there to what it was to back to what we have now? And I attribute it to 3 things. First of all, he's returned to that defensive player of the year form. He showed up in shape to training camp this year and completely committed on the defensive end of the floor. He leads the entire league in stocks, which is steals plus blocks. One of the most underrated things about Anthony Davis's defense is what he does with interior passing. We always think of drop coverage as in like funneling to the basket and trying to block layups or contest mid-range pull-ups or defend the roll man, right? But one of Anthony Davis's biggest gift is the disruption of interior passing. Drop-off passes, pocket passes, skip passes, swing passes. Anthony Davis is just getting deflections and blowing up plays constantly that are open for other teams in the league. It's one of the biggest things that separates him from your traditional defensive anchors like a Brook Lopez or a Rudy Gobert. It's also the same thing that makes Draymond Green so great, despite being less of a physical presence around the rim, is what he does disrupting interior passing. This year, Anthony Davis is anchoring the 4th best half-court defense in the entire NBA, despite having one legit wing defender, LeBron, who until recently was giving really inconsistent defensive effort. These legit 6'8" athletic wings with long arms that can move and that have good instincts, those guys are arguably the most important defensive weapon in the NBA these days. And the Lakers have one of them who's 37 years old and on a lot of nights doesn't care to do it. That's what he's been set up with. It's a lot of short guys that are scrappy and compete. In the aggregate, it's a below average defensive set of role players. And he's got them at the 4th best half-court defense in the NBA. He's not flanked by Giannis and Drew Holiday. He's doing it with some pretty average personnel. He got back to what he does best, and I think he's the defensive player of the year at this point. I think that was the first catalyst. And then that, in a lot of ways, drives confidence. When you're messing up other teams with what you're doing on defense, you start to feel good about who you are as a basketball player, which fuels your ability to do things on the offensive end of the floor. The second biggest thing that catalyzed or that got this Anthony Davis train back on the tracks was the high quality shots that he was able to get in pick and roll as a product of LeBron James and Russell Westbrook. So LeBron was pretty good last year, but AD was never available. Russell Westbrook had an atrocious season last year. This year, both LeBron James and Anthony Davis are available alongside Anthony Davis, and both of them are having much better seasons as pick and roll creators. LeBron had a rough start to the season, but in the last few games, he's been very, very good. And it's so important because, I refer to this as supplementary offense. So, you have your offensive skill set, what you do as a basketball player. Maybe that's creating shots and pick and roll. Maybe that's isolation. Maybe that's pick and pop. Maybe that's, posting up. Whatever that is, you've got all these different things that are your fundamental basketball abilities. But you can supplement that in a bunch of different ways. Maybe that's getting to the foul line. Maybe that's offensive rebounds. Maybe that's running the floor in transition for layups and threes. For Anthony Davis, one of his big pieces of supplementary offense is finishing as the roll man in pick and roll. He scored 151 points in 108 roll man possessions this year, which is in the 86th percentile. And some of it is dunks, right? AD's probably the best vertical spacer in the league. He's probably the best lob catcher and dunker in the entire league. But it's not just that. He's got this like little like pop shot where he just kind of holds it. It's almost like a floater, but like the big man version of a floater where he catches, turns, and just puts the ball up as high as he can and just kind of flips his wrist a little bit and puts it in. I always got to be careful when I'm trying to demonstrate my shots and I end up knocking the microphone. But that's such a huge thing because like what'll end up happening is LeBron and Russell Westbrook will get downhill. And that downhill piece is so important. You've got to engage the screen defender. You've got to get the big man to step up and help in order to drop the ball off to Anthony Davis for one of those shots. But it's not always a dunk. Sometimes they send a little guard or wing out of the weak side corner to help on Anthony Davis there. He's not going to dunk that. But what he can do is he can quick catch it and finish pretty much anywhere within 5 to 7 feet from the basket. And that's what separates him as a roll man from your usual vertical spacers that we have around the league. That's that supplementary offense that gets you to 37 points per game or whatever it is that he scores on any given night. And then last but not least, he's making his perimeter shot. In this 9-game stretch, Anthony Davis is 50% from mid-range, 46% from three. And it's helping in two particular ways. Some of it is just spacing. There was a specific play last night against the Washington Wizards in the third or fourth quarter. I can't remember. I think it was fourth. But Kyle Kuzma and Daniel Gafford were running an ice coverage on LeBron and AD on the left side of the floor. So an ice coverage is a typical pick and roll coverage that's used in the NBA and at all levels that involves usually the sides of the floor. You usually don't run it in the middle. You run it on the sides. And the idea is the screen is coming to try to get the ball handler towards the middle. And so the on-ball defender will essentially force the offensive player to reject the screen. So he'll get way up high. Say he's on the left side. He's going to get way up on his right shoulder so that LeBron has no choice but to go towards the baseline. Then Daniel Gafford will drop right in front of the block to basically corral that there. And they're basically saying, you're not going to use the screen. You're going to drive into Daniel Gafford. We've got all this help to deal with Anthony Davis in the lane. Good luck. There is one thing that beats an ice coverage consistently, and that's a pick and pop. Because if the ball handler is being funneled towards the baseline by the on-ball defender and the screen defender is waiting at the block, nobody is there to guard Anthony Davis or the screener if he pops. And there was a play in this game, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh, they're icing it. And LeBron and AD kind of looked at each other for a second, but then AD simply just popped to the three-point line. LeBron took a hard dribble towards the baseline, passed it back to Anthony Davis, and he nailed a three. You sometimes need perimeter shooting to beat specific coverages. And then look at those big threes that he made against Milwaukee in the fourth quarter. He made two of them, I think. There was one in the right corner, and then I think the other one was on the left wing. But hey, guess what Brook Lopez is doing? He's sitting at the basket. Sometimes just to keep him honest, you've got to demonstrate your ability to knock that shot down. But the second big important part of this shot-making piece is the ISO release valve factor. So the best versions of LeBron James teams ever have had a player that LeBron can just throw the ball to and he can go get a basket. Think Dwayne Wade, think Kyrie Irving, think Anthony Davis in the bubble. LeBron controls so much. Now he can share some of those responsibilities with Russ, but he controls so much. There's a fatigue element to it. And so when you have the ability not just to rescue possessions in late shot clock situations or to attack the occasional mismatch that might pop up, but also just to throw the ball to Anthony Davis and know, hey, I'm going to get a point per possession here because he's just going to create his own shot. In order for him to do that, he has to be able to make the jump shot. Because a lot of teams have started to put big, strong centers on him, knowing that he can't bully them towards the basket. This Kristaps Porzingis and Brook Lopez matchups are great examples of that. And AD lit those guys on fire with step backs and turnarounds and pull-up jump shots. And it was that release valve. And that's what's the difference between the Lakers being an average offense and them being the fourth best offense in the league over the last 10 games. Getting some shot making in those isolation situations. So with all that coming together, him locking in on the defensive end, getting high-quality shots in pick and roll from LeBron and Russ, and him finally getting his perimeter shot going, what do we have as a result? In this 10-game stretch, AD's played 9 of them. He's averaging 35 and 16 on 72% true shooting, and he's been the best defensive player in the world. Nobody in the world is playing better basketball right now than Anthony Davis in these last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. If you combine that guy with a top 10 version of LeBron James, doesn't even have to be what LeBron James was in 2020. If he's just a top 10 player and you get them quality role players, you can win a championship with that group. Now, Lonnie Walker has turned out to be a solid signing. Austin Reeves from last year has been a solid role player for this team. And Troy Brown Jr. has been a solid role player for this team. Even Russell Westbrook has won me over this season with what he's done in that bench role. My only concern with Russ, really, is the occasional bad night that can be, downright sabotage. But then also crunch time lineups. When you put him out there with LeBron James, it's just kind of a clunky fit. It's almost better when they're staggered. But overall, he's been very good this season. And I'm not even sure they can afford to lose him, especially with LeBron and some of his injury history. But no matter what, they need one more really good role player, preferably a wing, because I think, with what you're getting from Wenyen Gabriel and Thomas Bryant, and with how well Anthony Davis is playing at the 5, I don't think you need another big necessarily. I think it'd be ideal to find if they could get Kyle Kuzma. Could you imagine? That's the type of player that would just round out this roster perfectly. But they just need one more really good role player. I would say package Kendrick Nunn, Patrick Beverley, and another minimum contract or 2 with both picks for a wing, and you let the chips fall where they may. Give these guys a chance to win the title.